Hello everyone, my name is PJ and welcome back to another episode of The Hoarder. After getting off the ship and catching up with Zaymot, who'd recovered from his cold by this point, they found that the herder had helped themselves to the extra barrel of ale Chit bought. They begin riding them back to town, and that night, while Chit is on watch, a small spirit called a Chowinga curiously approached him. Chit, being a subtle, tact, and gentle sort, poked the Chowinga with a stick, scaring it off. They later learned that Chowingas gave blessings and charms to people who were nice to them, so they missed out on that. Later that night, Surge spots a large group of over a dozen Sahuagin preparing to ambush them from the water. He wakes everyone up, but before the fighting begins in earnest, their leader, a strong, masked Sahuagin carrying a warhammer, attempts to parley, despite the language barrier. He seems to demand that the party leave and give their herder over to them. Naturally, the party has none of that. They immediately mount their respective herder, and Surge creates an illusory barrel of ale for their herder to chase after, causing one of them to tramp over a few sea devils in the process. The Sahuagin attempt to give chase in the water, but the herder are very fast and have high constitution, so the sea devils are exhausted long before the herder are. After finally finishing their long rest, they make it back to Gundabog the next afternoon, only to find Tilda waiting for and running toward them, screaming Chit's name. Chet! She's out of breath from running toward them on the beach, until finally she says, "Chit, we have a problem." After returning their herder to the stables, they can already see from here that the highwayman is no longer where they left it. In its place is a beach full of dead guards, and the rowboat is curiously floating unmanned out at sea. Tilda explains that pirates showed up and stole the ship. Grizzle Todd speaks up and asks, "Did they, perchance, have skin like ashy parchment?" When Tilda confirms that they did, Todd and Chit both knew what this meant. Vampirates. One's working for Salvador, no doubt. And what's worse, Clara was on the ship, cleaning it, when it was commandeered. So now Salvador has the crystal rod, the highwayman, the princess of Gundolin, and, as Zaymot himself put it, his lizard lover. With much to discuss, Chit and Tilda head to the castle to speak with King Red Axe, while Surge, Elton, and Balthazar plan to go shopping, and Zaymot goes to the bar to drink his soon-to-be-much greater worries away. But being a generous sort, Zaymot also decides to stop by the herder farm and spend a lot of money buying them some barrels of ale, as a thank you for their hard work. Chit meets with the king and tells everything that he saw at the Golden Crown. He then talks about the princess and asks why the king didn't tell them about her. He responds, "Because I didn't want you going after her like my men did. You saw I only have one longship in the harbor, right? I used to have 12. My army is in shambles." Red Axe laments that there is nothing they can do, that they might have to submit to Salvador's will. And that's when, in town, Balthazar looks up to see an ancient white dragon suddenly arrive on the scene, cloaked in a blizzard and heading for the castle. He and Surge send Elton to go get Zaymot while they rush to the castle. The dragon barrels over the guards and bursts down the doors, letting herself into the massive throne room. Riding on her back is a completely cloaked humanoid male, strapped to a special saddle and wearing several bags and pouches filled with rare magic items. 'Twas Arveaturus, the niece of old Snowblow, the dying great worm they'd met on the previous island, and the one whose wormling was kidnapped by the Hoarder. "It would seem," she began, "that you are in a desperate situation yet again, Sir Red Axe." The king knows what she wants, and stutteringly refuses to give it to her. Arveiaturus turns to Chit, believing him to have more open ears. She explains that her husband, Melthorond, the human sitting on her back, is suffering from an affliction that only a high-level cleric can undo. She spent years tormenting the high priest of Auril in town, murdering everyone he loves systematically, trying to get him to do it, only for him to refuse every time. But now, Chit and his friends are in a situation where they need help reaching the Baranzo mining colony where Salvador is. She claims that she is in possession of a lantern of radiance, which will make anyone within its light immune to the effects of sapping snow. She will trade it to the heroes if their cleric of Bahamut agrees to use the scroll she provides on her husband. When the other PCs arrive, Arveiaturus calls each of them by name. She already knows a bit about them, their accomplishments, and their hometowns, explained by the fact that her lover, Melthorond, is a powerful wizard with access to many scrying tools. With everyone present, King Redax insists that they be allowed to discuss Arveiaturus's offer in private, which she smugly agrees to. Serge stays behind to, keep her company, I guess? He tries to talk her ear off, but Melthorond just whips out a wand of silence and casts it on him. The king leads everyone down to a special chamber he has that's immune to scrying effects and other divination spells. Once everyone's inside, he makes everyone promise that what he's about to tell them never ever leaves this room, for it may spell doom for all of Gundolin. They promise, and Redax is blunt in his reveal. "That man you saw riding on her back," he says, "Melthorond, is dead. No, not undead, dead. That is his corpse, whose death Arveiaturus has refused to accept for centuries. She uses telekinesis to move him about, and can even make him use magic items without holding or wearing them herself, all to create the illusion that he's still alive. She wants his death to be kept secret, but that's just made it more difficult to find a way to bring him back from the dead. Not that it's even possible, mind you. For you see, the scroll she brought is one of true resurrection, which, while powerful, is incapable of bringing back someone if they died from old age. She is chasing an unattainable fantasy, but telling her that would only incite her fury. That is why we have refused all these years. And even if we could bring Melthorond back, the two of them with their forces combined would be an even greater source of havoc and destruction than Arveiaturus is on her own. After much discussion, the PCs finally come up with a plan after discarding several worse plans. They would send Zaymot up by himself and agree to use the scroll. He had inspiration, which, with our rules, would guarantee success in attempting to use it. And when it doesn't work, it will prove to her that true resurrection is not a viable option. Zaymot practices his lines carefully, and then heads upstairs. Zaymot sends Serge out of the room, for his safety of course, and says to Arveiaturus that he'll cast the spell only if she agrees to leave the island once it's cast, regardless of the result. She does agree, but on the condition that she still be allowed to stop by and drink from the springs. This is acceptable. Zaymot is given the scroll, and he pretends to be surprised when he reads what the spell is. He doesn't push the issue, but he warns her that this spell may not do what she's hoping for. Nevertheless, he casts it, and with inspiration, guarantees that it works, even though he's not high enough level to cast it normally. The magical sparkles and visual effects appear around Melthorond's corpse, and when they subside, he does not respond to Aviatrix's beckoning. Angry, she turns to Xamot and accuses him of failing. He tries to insist that the spell was successfully cast, but failed because the target was invalid. He keeps doing this, keeps coming up with different explanations, but he fails all of his charisma checks, making her even angrier. She demands to know what could fix Melthorond, if not true resurrection, but the only things he could think of were the Wish spell and Lichdom, neither of which he really wanted her to know about. She says that she needs time to do some research of her own and see if what Xamot says is true. If it's not, she'll destroy both Xamot's hometown of Rivercrest and all of Gundolin. In the meantime, though, she does indeed give Xamot the lantern, then smacks him with her tail, critically hitting as she turns to leave. But before she does leave, she turns back and says, "Kill the Hoarder," then flies off. Only minorly wounded, Xamot did manage to get the lantern, which will allow him and his compatriots to travel through the snowy mountains unhindered by the sapping effects of the snow. King Redax, not terribly confident about this victory, decides he's going to send as many civilians away from the island using his last longship as he can, just in case Aviatrix returns angry. In the meantime, though, the rest of the session ended up being a super shopping episode. They got a shit ton of money from the Golden Crown, and boy howdy did they spend it. First things first, they visited the High Priest of Oro to cure Haljal's collapsed lung and Surge's curse. The High Priest learned the PCs potentially drove Aviatrix, the one who'd killed so many of his loved ones, away for good. So that day he offered them free healing. Surge's rotten flesh was finally returned to normal, and with it his powers of persuasion, and Haljal was finally able to breathe and speak normally again. Thankful, but eager to get back to his old life as a miner, he agreed to remain a part of the crew until they made it back to the Sword Coast, and with his health restored, he could now craft things at double the normal rate, 10 golds worth per day instead of 5. And craft things he would! With Super Haljal, Chit, and the local blacksmith, whose name is Joanna, they could work together to craft things at quadruple speed. Chit wanted 30 more bullets for his gun. Surge wanted to turn his Ghoul Claw, which still contains 1 use of injury poison in it, into a usable dagger. Balthazar wanted something unusual. He asked them to smith a longsword sized for a large creature. With a large longsword, he could deal 2d8 slashing damage with one hand, but he would permanently attack with disadvantage. Not a problem for a barbarian, though, because he can just spam reckless attack if something else isn't granting him advantage, like flanking. And who needs to crit when your normal damage is 2d8? As for granting advantage to enemies with reckless, Balthazar bought an adamantine breastplate for 900 gold, which makes him immune to critical hits, and a +1 shield for 400 gold, bringing his AC up to 19, tying with Xamot. It would take the rest of that day, plus 3 more days, for the smiths to craft all of this. During that time, they would continue to find things to spend their money on. I decided that local shops carry every common and uncommon magic item, minus the ones I don't want them to have, like bags of holding, simply because this is a castle town and not a lowly village or port town. Also, it is a port with a castle, so that does improve trade a lot, so it's reasonable to think they would have all of these magic items, and I limited them to only 1 of each anyway, so only 1 +1 shield. Elton upgraded to studded leather and bought +1 versions of his scimitar and light crossbow. The PCs also bought him a short sword of warning, so he could warn the party about nighttime encounters and also dual wield if necessary. In addition to his new gear, Balthazar bought a pair of goggles of night, which give the wearer dark vision. They don't require attunement, so he and Elton will be sharing them, since Chit bought the only other magic item in town that grants dark vision, the Helm of Underwater Action. Chit also bought some strong poisons from Parzish, and a really big tarp to use as a makeshift 5-person tent, held up by the immovable rod that Surge purchased. And finally, for utility's sake, everyone bought winter cloaks, several stronger potions of healing, including the town's single potion of superior healing, 600 gold's worth of diamonds for Zaymot's Revivify spell, and 20 flasks of oil to ensure the Lantern of Radiance never runs out while they're in the snow. While waiting for the craftsmen to finish their work, the rest of the party spends their time carousing and gambling. Zaymot challenges a ruffian to a dice game and wins, netting him a neat pirate hat that he gives to Surge, who immediately puts it on, replacing his jester hat. Balthazar, with his 20 strength score, challenges the same ruffian to an arm wrestle, and somehow manages to lose. Only for Surge, the party's weakest member, to challenge that ruffian for shits and giggles and somehow win, after tying in the first round. Balthazar and Zaymot buy the dispirited ruffian a few drinks, and they all have a grand old laugh. The night that they returned, Surge had a strange dream. He found himself in a small room with blue glass walls and ceiling, the carpeted floor covered in comfy, vibrantly colored pillows. As he looked around, realizing he was trapped, he thought he saw his mother standing in the room, but when he reached out to her, she disappeared, and a massive, green-skinned woman appeared outside the room and smashed in the walls with the grasp of her hand. And then Surge woke up. The next day, he intuitively realized that the room he was in was inside the gem of his ring. And when he focused, he discovered that he could shrink down and enter it. Not only that, but just like Chit, he'd suddenly developed a few warlock powers. This was all to explain how, when Surge reached level 5, he took a level in Warlock. His patron? Why, none other than the mother of the water genasi who came to take the highwaymen. Mistress of the Palace of Wonders, the Merid, Nura.